Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and a lovely big hug to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing fabulously well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And I'm very excited about tonight's story. This is part 5, and it's building up very, very nicely. So we're going to find out what happened on the old Dogwood Road to Victoria Fontaine. So let's continue with part 5 of our story. Me and your mother became incredibly intrigued after we'd eavesdropped on that very exciting conversation. And we talked about nothing else all evening apart from the paranormal. People think stories of the paranormal have only come to public scrutiny in the last couple of centuries, especially in the advent of all those television programs they air. But I'm here to tell you not so, young lady. That is not the case. When I was growing up, amongst my Nancy Drew novels and Famous 5 books, me and all my friends talked about ghosts all the time. We'd go to the library and take out every available book we could find about ghostly hauntings. We were riveted, fascinated about the stuff, by all things unexplained and mysterious. Because I think most people are, you know. Some more than others, of course. I think age has no fading effect on the passion within all of us to have a glimpse of the mysteries in our world that make life so much more intriguing. Anyway, me and your mother left the bar that night, together, laughing happily as you do, having had perhaps a wee bit too much alcohol to drink. It was a warm night, very pleasant it was, with a cool breeze blowing. I had promised to lift Sammy back to her home. Your mother knew her husband and baby were sleeping very safely back at her house. When I dropped her off, she'd need to enter the house very quietly, so as not to disturb you most especially. Furthermore, your father didn't take very kindly to being woken up in the middle of the night, given he was a light sleeper anyway. So any disturbance in the household would likely jolt you out of your sleep. Your mother said you had a pair of lungs on you that would make a foghorn. Well, would put it to shame, that is. And once you started crying, you were like an air raid siren, and your parents just could not shut you up. So they valued their sleep greatly. Your mother turned around to me in the car and said, "Victoria, please, let's go to the old Dogwood Road, just quickly. See if we can see something outer-worldly there. I've always wanted to see a ghost. Go on, it'll be fun. Be a sport." My eyes widened, I have to say. I looked at your mother as if she'd lost leave of her senses. "Are you for real?" I said dubiously. "You heard what that young man had to say about the bodeful encounter he had on the old Dogwood Road, and you seriously think we should venture out there in the middle of the night?" "Oh, go on, Victoria. You know you want to," your mother said to me. "It's going to be fun. We're in this together in the car. What's the worst that could happen to us? Being scared out of our wits. And that's part of the fun, is it not?" "But I do think it's a big deal," I said. "Being scared, I mean." One thing about your mother, young lady, was she was mulishly stubborn and resolutely determined. Very persuasive she was, much like yourself. For if that were not the case, I would not be sharing the intricacies of this bizarre story with you. Your mother artfully persuaded me that a brief trip down the old Dogwood Road would not harm us in the slightest. Her reasoning made perfect sense to me, because lots of people have travelled down that old Dogwood Road in the middle of the night, experiencing no issues whatsoever. So why should it be any different for us? Reluctantly, I agreed to your mother's dogged requests. Why not, I thought to myself. At the end of the day, is it really such a big deal? And Sammy's absolutely right. If we were to encounter something bizarre on the old Dogwood Road, we'd have a marvellous story to tell of our own. All right, I said to her. "We'll go down the Dogwood Road." And you know what your mother said to me. "I know now why you're my best friend, Victoria. You're always open to having a good time. That's what I've always liked about you." I do remember it was an inauspiciously dark night, despite the pleasant weather we'd been having, and your mother enjoyed the fact that it was creepy. I think she took a kind of macabre pleasure from being moderately spooked, as if it kind of gave her a little thrill. like some people get from bungee jumping or throwing themselves out of a plane in a parachute. "Oh my goodness, it's so dark out there," she said, as we took a casual spin down the road, which, let me tell you, was precariously bumpy. We were jolting around like rice in a child's rattle, which gave your mother an attack of the giggles. "I can hardly see anything," she said. "Thank God for your headlights, Victoria, lighting up the way so generously. Or I guess we wouldn't see a thing at all, would we? I don't even see any stars out tonight, and as for the moon, it's clearly had a bad hair day and decided not to show its face. Maybe it's had an outbreak of acne and has got all bashful," she teased. It was true, of course. The sky looked like a dark velvety veil that had not yet been adorned with any rhinestone jewels, so to speak. I will admit it was hauntingly spooky, no doubt about that, driving down a tenebrific road fringed by large congregations of tall, lofty trees that looked ambiguously obscure in the dancing shadows, almost like menacing hooded giants that could pounce out at you with a gnarled woody hand and grab you unaware. Your mother was making all those spooky noises to entertain us. Ooh, ooh. She was game for a good laugh and had a fabulous sense of humour, you know. But as we were driving down the old Dogwood road, your mother screamed, "Stop! Stop! A deer! You're going to hit him! You've got to stop, Victoria!" I tried to swerve out the way as this huge, giant-like deer rocketed past our car. To date, I have never seen a more magnificent deer. Everything about him was built on a larger scale. His body, his magnificent antlers that were absolutely enormous. I'll never forget those black startled eyes. Filled with fear they were, staring at us, looking back onto the road as if it was terrified that something was pursuing it. A predator, perhaps. I'm not sure how I lost control of the car, but I did. The only way I can describe it, it felt almost as if it was yanked off the ribbon of the road by a large invisible hand. The next thing I knew is my car went veering off the road straight into a tree, and I remember hearing your mother's frantic screams, and for a moment I almost blacked out myself. I was swung violently forward in my seat, and the airbags were released. There was a mighty crash as we slammed violently into the tree, and for the moment I did actually think I was facing the end of my life, but was remarkably surprised to find that even though the car was a complete write-off, me and your mother were very much alive and in one piece. But it felt like one of my legs and a foot was trapped under the folds of the metal, because I couldn't pull it away, which was very disturbing indeed. "Bloody hell!" said Sammy. "I can't believe that happened. Are you all right, Victoria?" "I think so," I said. "My foot is stuck under this metal here. I can't pull it out, and it really hurts. A bit of my leg is stuck there as well." We were both staring out at the trees on the edge of the road in abject astonishment. We knew in that moment we were very lucky to be alive. That was for sure. Your mother was breathing heavily to steady her nerves, I suspect, while I broke out into a clammy, nervous sweat. "Did you see the size of that deer?" said Sammy, looking at me with shiny eyes. "I could see it was frightened by something. Poor thing! Don't feel sorry for the deer. Look at us. At least it's alive and well. But we're caught up in this wreck of a car and we need to get out. I cannot move my foot. I'm stuck. You're going to have to get out of the door. Walk over to the Croydon farmhouse to get help for us. I think there's a footpath through the trees somewhere around there." All of a sudden, something very strange happened. I don't think airy is a word to qualify for how bodefully haunting everything became. A wind whistled menacingly through the trees, brazenly shaking the branches, and then a mist seemed to creep across the ground, spreading thickly like icing on a cake, or like dry ice spreading its thick foggy veil across a dance floor at a wedding.
but it soon took over everything, so that all we saw in our car was a dense, cloying mist. Suddenly it seemed that the moon re-emerged from its hiding place, as the road was lit up in a silvery bluish light. And there, in that foggy mist, we saw this hideous, grotesque, gargantuan silhouette. A dark, ambiguous figure it was, with monacious yellow eyes, glowering at us through this thick, obscure curtain of mist. Me and your mother began to tremble violently, like two shaking trees hit hard by a spirited tornado. Your mother was saying, "What the hell is that in the mist?" We knew we should get out of the car, but my foot was stuck beneath crushed metal, and your mother didn't want to leave me on my own. Thankfully, we did not smell any gas or observe any smoke coming from the engine of the car. But it's very easy after an accident, you know, for a car to catch a light. But nothing like that happened. The mist was crawling and creeping all over the car, like white waves thrashing violently against a small little island. We couldn't see a thing, I remember that. And then slowly and surely the mist began to dissipate. But the troubling thing was we knew, absolutely unequivocally, that there was something monacious in that mist. And we weren't wrong. There standing before us was the most monstrous beast that I have ever beheld. "A beast?" gasped Gemma. "What kind of a beast are you talking about?" "That's the problem," said Violet, beginning to shake like a leaf, as she reluctantly described the creature she and Sammy had seen on the old Dogwood road. "It was like something the bowels of hell regurgitated, like unwanted waste matter from the sewage pipes of hell itself. The first thing I recall is the repugnant, cloying, sulphurous smell. It stole your breath away, it did. So it stung my lungs, along with the back of my throat. It was an acrid, acid stench, reminiscent of death and decay, intermingled with rotting garbage. The creature was tall, lofty, lanky, easily 7 to 8 foot tall, sinewy, rather muscular, with ribs that clawed through its flesh. The creature looked like it had been attacked by the mange. There were bald patches of its hair, which was short and dense, exactly the same golden brown and black colour you would find of a German shepherd dog. This insidiously macabre creature looked exactly like something drawn up by the fictitious imagination of Universal Studios for the purposes of a horror movie, designed to rob every man and woman of a peaceful night's sleep. For believe me, my dear, if you saw this thing in your dreams, you'd never ever sleep again. This creature was half wolf and half human, with a monstrously intimidating muzzle. Never seen anything like it before. Exactly like a wolf. There were 2 rows of canine teeth, without exaggeration, that were grinning at us through his jaws. He was menacing. I've never beheld such a gargantuanly disgusting creature in all my life. And he was drooling over us, as if salivating over a meal. There were globlets of spittle, as gelatinous as aloe vera gel, blobbing out of its mouth and congealing on the ground. There were patches of dried blood like jam on a kid's face, stuck messily to the short hair on either side of its muzzle. And I noticed some downy white bird feathers stuck in its hair. I'll never forget those monacious eyes, dark and purple, like that of a raven's feathers. But it was like there was no reflectant light in those eyes, no glimmer of compassion, no humanity. It was like they were devoid of anything remotely good. The creature stood up on its hind legs, walking much like a man, swinging its arms very nimbly. I did notice it had clawed hands with jagged nails that were as sharp as razor blades, capable of inflicting great damage. Of that I was in no doubt. It also had a very bushy tail, I noticed. It was swinging backwards and forwards as it moved, rather like a pendulum, as if slightly inebriated. I think it was just excited by the sight of us, as if just looking at us was giving him an euphoric high of a kind. For a moment I do remember being locked under his gaze, as if I was being tossed around in pools of dark black water that was beginning to drown me and swallow me whole. It was the most horrifying feeling. Your mother screamed at me to get out of the car and to run, but I couldn't go anywhere. I was trapped in the car. I was certain that I was going to be this creature's next meal, but I underestimated the creature's desire to chase his food and the thrill of the hunt. The creature adopted the instincts of a lion or even a domestic tabby, toying with a mouse, subjecting it to much teasing torture. This insidious thing did not want its meal delivered on wheels, which is a human inclination, is it not? Convenience and practicality when it comes to our food. No, that was too easy for this creature. He wanted a great deal of fun. He could have grabbed me out of the car, extracting me like a sardine from a tin. But no, that was far too boring for him, far too efficiently easy. He could have devoured me in a heartbeat if that were the case. But no, I imposed absolutely no challenge to him. Your mother made one grievous mistake when she opened the car door, which, despite being so buckled, did actually open. Your mother ran as fast as the wind, and the hideous creature gave her chase as if it was a fabulous game. I was sitting there, of course, with my foot stuck beneath the folds of protruding metal, being unable to help her at all. Your mother was in a dreadful place. I did blow the horn over and over again to scare off this creature, but my actions appeared to excite him all the more, making the chase even more fun for him. Your mother was no match for this thing. It caught up to her so effortlessly, with the fluidness of silk and a triumphant smug look on its hideously ugly face. He threw your mother onto his shoulders like a dead-beat sack of potatoes, and then he stood there staring at me triumphantly, where I was sitting in the car watching everything, and he was enjoying my fear, practically basking in it, as if he was sunning himself on a tropical island. Your mother was screaming, kicking, and fighting back. I'll give her that. But this ghastly thing held her hostage on his shoulders with one powerful, strong, clawed hand, as if she weighed no more than a feather. Then the most extraordinary thing happened. The mist reappeared and circumnavigated the entire car, weaving its vaporous threads across the road, like an ethereal tapestry made up entirely of mist. The creature vanished, dematerialized, and after that I blacked out. I'm not exactly sure what happened. My head did not get injured in that collision. I think I must have just passed out from the shock of it all. It was hours later that I was woken up by a firefighter, cutting me out of the wreckage, asking me if I was all right. I remember it was no longer dark, so I must have been asleep or knocked out in that car all night, without remembering a thing, until someone discovered my car on the old Dogwood road and immediately called the emergency services for help. I'm still amazed that that monstrous creature did not come back to devour me. But I'll tell you one thing, it still haunts my darkest nightmares, and sometimes I wonder if that is the very reason it didn't devour me, so that I could continue to live in fear, long after that experience, because my life has never been the same again since that fateful day.
So that creature took my mother away? Asked Gemma, unable to believe what she was hearing. Of all the stories that Violet Fontaine could have potentially told her of her mother's mysterious vanishing, this was not what she was expecting to hear. Violet nodded her head solemnly, her eyes clouded over by tears, her body shuddering. I'm afraid so. I warned you, young lady, that this story was not going to be easy for you to hear, nor has it been easy for me to tell. For a long time I persuaded myself I had imagined the whole thing that happened on the old Dogwood road, but I assure you, this was no illusory dream. I've never been inspired by a rich imagination.
Even the teachers at school when I was growing up described my redundant essays as lacking both depth and imagination. Of course, I told my father the story. He absolutely believed me. He told me to keep stum. People might think I needed psychiatric help and had lost leave of my senses, so I couldn't tell people what had really happened. I hasten to say, the reporters that investigated the accident were told exactly what I've told everybody over the years, that Sammy had vanished from the car like a wisp of smoke. It was so much better that way. I even told your father the very same story. I couldn't possibly tell him the truth. I figured that in this macabre case, the not knowing was infinitely kinder. I'm in no doubt your mother was eaten by that ghastly creature, so she is almost certainly dead.
Violet shuddered, closing her eyes tightly, as if desperately trying to fight away the roaring, obstreperous waves of a tempestuous memory that had successfully shipwrecked her entire life and drowned all her dreams and aspirations, so they sank to the bottom of the ocean like the last remaining dregs of the Titanic.
Now you can see why I was terribly reluctant to share this story with you. But you insisted on hearing it, so I told you. But one thing I did learn about that incident, I learned to respect that there are things in this world you just don't want to mess with, which is why I decided to live a peaceful, very quiet, sequestered life. I think some reporters did gleam I knew more than I was willing to tell, but they never ever got a bean out of me.
I don't know what to say, said Gemma. I'm just so astonished by what you've told me. It's not what I expected to hear by any manner of means.
I'm sorry, dear. I told you, it's not easy to listen to a story like that.
Believe it or not, Violet, as hard as it might be to believe, I'm very glad you shared it with me. And you are right, my mother is almost certainly dead. But do you know what? I feel a sense of peace knowing what really happened to her. I can't imagine what she went through in those final moments. But if she was pumping enough adrenaline at the time, it might have made the pain more bearable for her, whatever that thing did to her. But I'm glad that right now she's at peace, and in the end, that's all that matters, really.
You're right about that. I try to persuade myself that all the time. Your mother is at peace now. We mustn't forget that.
After Gemma thanked Violet for her time, she wobbled back to the old station wagon on unsteady legs, like an inebriated drunk, unable to comprehend why her legs were crumbling beneath her. It would seem the paralyzing shock of Violet's stunning revelations had hit her grievously hard, like a violent slap across the face, so she felt like an office desk globe that had somehow become dislodged from its axis and crash-landed on the floor. All she wanted to do was to return to the cabin, block out the entire world, while melancholically brooding over everything that Violet had told her, in a quiet contemplation, while knocking back a bottle of Bollinger to anaesthetize the stunning shock of it all. Nothing had prepared Gemma for the cat out of the bag that Violet would unleash in her story, and this one almost certainly had sharp nails that had slashed right through her unapologetically, as images of her mother being carried away on a wolf-like humanoid shoulders to her imminent demise sent dreadful chills prickling down her spine. No wonder Violet had retreated into her own little world, after having come face to face with such a treacherous evil. By all accounts, despite everything that Gemma had learnt about what really had happened to her mother that day, the day that she wistfully just disappeared into thin air, knowing the truth, no matter how dreadful, did bring her a sense of closure, the closure she desperately sought, and for that she was most grateful. She decided she'd enjoy a lazy day back at the cabin, as the idea of doing anything would be far too taxing, as her energy felt as drained as an empty gas tank. She felt as ready to collapse as an old portable camping chair, desirous to just fold up and remain inconspicuously hidden away in a dark corner. Gemma parked the old station wagon by the cabin, eager to retreat into the cosy confines of the cocoon of safety that the wooden walls invited,
and the salient, soothing promises that she'd be left well alone, nestled between the sweet sounds of the woodgrove and the tall, lofty trees that upholstered the cabin from every side, like towering centurions watching over her protectively. The woodgrove was tranquil and serene, the trees swishing gently in a cool breeze that blocked out the warmth of the day, like large verdant umbrellas, and despite the weight of Gemma's lugubrious melancholia, she was able to acknowledge how incredibly beautiful everything was. Gemma did not feel like moving a muscle when she entered the cabin. She threw herself lackadaisically across the comfortable couch, with the full intention of parking herself there all day, like a lazy cat, basking in the privilege of doing nothing at all. She began indulging in one glass of Bollinger after another, and for once in her life she took no stock of how much alcohol she was actually ingesting. And quite frankly, she was beyond caring. She had never been much of a drinker, but the wine anaesthetized her raw emotions and made digesting the harrowing bitter news about how her mother had come to an end a whole lot easier to stomach. Gemma was in no doubt the story Violet had told her was the God-honest truth. No one could make up a story like that. The truth could be stranger than fiction. She wondered how anyone in their right mind could venture on the old Dogwood road after having heard a story like her mother had overheard that night in the bar all those years ago. It brought to mind the saying, "Curiosity killed the cat." And unlike a cat, her mother regretfully did not have 9 lives. She wondered what would have happened if her mother had not run from this insidious beast in the way she did. Would she still be here today? Would the beast have grown restlessly bored if her mother had remained in that car, like a mouse playing dead under a cat's demanding paws? She would never know the answer to that enigmatic question, but she secretly suspected the cunning, crafty beast would have terrorized the 2 women to provoke them to fear, so that her mother would have been forced to run away, and then he'd have given her chase to satisfy his drive for a thrill. She was glad she'd come to Montana, and that Violet had opened up to her in the way she did. But right now her raw emotions were seesawing up and down, as she tried to make sense of everything. Gemma barely remembered the day, as she had drunk so much alcohol. It was a struggle even to stagger to the bathroom. The heaviness had lifted off her, as the alcohol had brought on an attack of the giggles, and she couldn't help herself just laughing at everything, because everything suddenly became terribly, terribly funny. She found herself laughing at the cheese in the refrigerator that looked like it was shaped like a dog, and laughing hysterically when by mistake she boiled the socks instead of the pasta quills she had been intending to eat. It would seem her memory of the afternoon was all but an ambiguous blur, of which she could not remember very much. She awoke in the cabin to be greeted by the soft light of the oil lamp burning on the coffee table and casting soft shadows over the cabin. Gemma glimpsed the clock hanging on the wall above the mantel and gasped. It was 12 at night, and she had only had brief flashbacks of the previous day and her visit to Violet Fontaine's cottage. Most of her memories were obliterated by the dulling effects of the alcohol she had ingested that seemed to wipe away all the imprints of the day, which had become hazy and obscure, as if she was trying to look back at them through a misted glass pane. She realized she must have slept for many hours. She was still not in her right mind, as the alcohol had softened the sharp edges of her common sense and dulled her emotional trepidation, so she felt tranquilized and pleasingly calm. Gemma got to her feet, pleased to discover that her legs felt less ethereal and that her balance was reasonably good, as much of the alcohol had been metabolized by her system, but she was still not out of the woods yet. There was enough alcohol in her system to blur her common sense and her sound reasoning. "I should go and visit the old Dogwood road, get a feel for the place," she told herself. "It will give me a sense of what my mother experienced on that treacherous night, when the hands of fate conspired against her so callously." If Gemma had been completely sober, her thinking would not have opened up into a labyrinth of strange ideas, which in her rational thinking she would have considered absolutely insane. But tonight, going back to the old Dogwood road like a crime scene investigator seemed like a rather good idea. Gemma grabbed her torch impulsively and put on a pair of jogging pants and a sweater along with a pair of hiking boots, and armed with her torch to the ready, she scrambled out of the cabin at the dead of night, paying no heed to the warnings from Mrs. Tansey, telling her that it was not advisable to go out at night in the woods. Mrs. Tansey had told her if she walked through the trees, she'd come to the old Dogwood road. Gemma was not entirely certain what it was she wanted to see on the old Dogwood road, with its ominous haunted reputation. She wasn't hoping to spot the ghostly female hitchhiker trying to get a ride from an unsuspecting driver, nor did she want an encounter with an ambiguous figure in the mist. But maybe what she really wanted was a glimpse of the road upon where her mother had last been seen alive. If there were any warnings lighting up Gemma's head, she neither saw them or gave them any attention. Instead, she giggled as she meandered through the woods, realizing she wasn't exactly as steady on her feet as she first believed. But it didn't matter, did it? The more she walked, the steadier she'd become. It was a fabulously beautiful night. Even Gemma had to admit that. The weather was pleasingly warm. The footpaths were generously spread out and clearly marked, and wide enough to walk through the trees without being rudely scratched by unsuspecting branches or uncongenial thorny briars. It was cloyingly dark and very oppressive under the vast canopy of the trees. They were clustered tightly together like a vast army battalion. Somehow, with the light of her torch and the soft, gentle prisms of pretty moonlight that danced through the trees, it was not as daunting as it could have been. Gemma found herself being eaten alive by mosquitoes that seemed to be smacking against her skin, delighting in the taste of her blood. But she noticed them not. She ambled through the trees steadily, occasionally kicking up leaves and twigs, and sometimes tripping over a gnarled root or two that trespassed through the earthen floor. But every time she fell over, she scrambled awkwardly back onto her feet, brushing away the dirt and leaves from her jogging pants. When Gemma was in a sober state, she'd never have even contemplated an adventure like this in the middle of the night. But it would seem being slightly tipsy had made her muscles more loose, so falling over didn't hurt quite so much, which is why drunken people fare a lot better in car accidents, due to their relaxed muscles. Gemma, who was normally intimidated by the dark, felt no fear as she pursued her quarry with a boundless enthusiasm. Finally the trees opened up like a dispersing crowd, and then there she was standing on a long dirt road that looked old, forsaken and forgotten, as if it hadn't been used in a long, long time, possibly because of its haunted reputation. The full moon lit up the road in prisms of soft light, so that any ambiguous shadows from the trees became less obscure. Gemma meandered down the road and giggled, because it was so ordinary. Yes, it looked sequestered. Yes, it looked lonely, but there was nothing outer-worldly or idiosyncratic about it. She walked past the trees fringing the road on both sides, looking for any signs of a damaged tree that might bear the indelible scarring of having been hit hard by a car over 30 long years ago. But all the trees and the lights of her torch didn't appear to be wearing any harrowing scars that hinted of a head-on collision with a car. Surely she'd be able to see signs of damage in the bark. But Gemma saw nothing. No telltale markers in the trees at any place along the road. She was sure if she found the tree, it would make her feel close to her mother, as incongruous as that might sound. Gemma had not thought to ask Violet about the tree that the car had bludgeoned into on that inauspicious night. All of a sudden Gemma froze to the spot, when she realized suddenly, very sharply, that she was not alone, that something was watching her. And this spooky realization sent prickles of dread crawling down her spine. She could hear the sound of forest litter being pulverized beneath ponderous feet. She heard the crackle and rustling sounds of leaves being assaulted by heavy kicks, and the snapping sounds of twigs. Something was in the trees. Something was watching her. She had the profound sense that she was being scrutinized. In a trice, Gemma became incredibly sober, as she suddenly became profoundly aware of her own fragility and vulnerability. What on earth was she doing here? Why had she come out onto this country road in the middle of the night? Was she stark raving mad? As a whoosh of common sense flooded her reasoning, like a blinding light, she saw an ambiguous dark shadow emerging through the trees, lunging towards her with huge, powerful strides, and for a brief moment she froze to the spot, as the creature roared, standing on the fringes of the road, glaring at her furiously through enraged yellow eyes. She was staring at a Bigfoot. She'd heard of these creatures before, but seeing one in the flesh larger than life was hard to physically digest. And this horrifying creature, standing on tree trunk-sized legs, at about 9 foot tall and 800 pounds, was possibly the most terrifying thing she'd ever beheld. His burly, robust body was covered with purple-black hair, the colour of a raven's feathers. The Bigfoot roared and thrashed his chest with an unbridled indignance. It would seem he was enraged with Gemma, as if she'd trespassed onto private property and offended him greatly, and all of a sudden he began to give her chase. She thought about how her mother's running had been her undoing, but Gemma could not help herself. She had to run away from this Bigfoot, or she was certain she was dead. The Bigfoot was not chasing her because he was thrilled by her fear. He was chasing her because she had ventured where she was not wanted. And that was the difference. Gemma's reluctant legs, like a rusty, degraded farm tractor that had not been used in decades, sprang into action as she ran aimlessly into the woods, following the footpath towards the cabin. The Titanic-sized creature trailed behind her, kicking the ground furiously with his continuingly powerful strides, that much like loose floorboards, everything in the woodgrove groaned and shook under his formidable weight. This large, imposing Bigfoot was breathing heavily, heaving and spluttering, as it chased her through the trees. It moved with a powerful, nimble gait, with effortless grace and ease, while Gemma's feet were slow on the uptake, so she still did not know how she managed to get back to the cabin in time. But she realized she hadn't locked the door, so she hurriedly scrambled inside, closing it behind her as hard as she could, with trembling hands. She managed to double-bolt it, and with a pounding heart that was doing a series of jumping jacks in her chest, and with laboured breathing, she sank to the ground beneath the door. She could hear the Bigfoot thundering very loudly around the cabin, as if he wanted her to know that he was still out there. She was terrified he'd break down the door, grab her, ferry her away to meet a similar deadly fate that had met her own mother. Gemma screamed when she realized that the Bigfoot's face was pressed against the window pane, and he was looking in directly at her. But to her amazement, his eyes did not appear to be mean or unkind. To Gemma's surprise, the Bigfoot walked away and continued to march around the cabin all night. Gemma awoke to find herself lying in a slumped heap on the floor. When she arose from her sleep, she wondered if the idiosyncratic events of the previous night had been real. Surely they'd been an unfortunate dream. But when she saw the dreadful state of her clothing, the leaves and the mud sticking to her shoes, she realized what had transpired had indeed been real. Gemma wasted no time peeking through the window to see if the Bigfoot was still patrolling the cabin, but she was delighted to see he was long gone. But what she did find on the front doorstep was a pretty blue stone, which she slipped into her pocket. Gemma could not stay in the cabin a moment longer. She threw all her belongings together into a suitcase very speedily, and left a note for Mrs. Tansey, apologizing that her time at the cabin had been cut short, as she needed to return to New York urgently. Gemma called the taxi driver, and the very same thin man that had initially taken her to the cabin arrived to pick her up. He did not speak to her as he put her suitcase in the back of his trunk. Gemma knew she looked like she'd been dragged through a hedge backwards, but she didn't care. She could not get to the airport fast enough to get the hell away from this Montana town. Gemma nonchalantly pulled the blue stone out of her jean pocket to examine it closely in her fingers, and to her surprise, the taxi driver who'd been watching her through the visor mirror suddenly stopped his car and turned around to look directly at her. "Where did you get that stone from?" he asked her. I found it on my doorstep, she said. Well, the doorstep of the cabin. Why do you ask? That is a solar stone, said the taxi driver. My grandmother was given one once by a Bigfoot, you know. Those stones are used for protection, to keep you safe from evil, I'm told. My grandmother was given one because her husband, my grandfather, was beating her up very badly. She met a Bigfoot who told her to keep the stone, and my grandfather left her after that. Never touched her again, you know. The stone worked. I just don't understand what one is doing in your possession. They're quite rare, you know.
Gemma was not about to confide in the taxi driver, but she realized in that poignant moment that maybe the Bigfoot that had chased her into the woods from the road had done so because she was in grievous danger, and then he'd marched around the cabin to keep her safe, and he'd left her a stone for protection. But one thing Gemma knew for certain, she'd keep the stone, but never again return to the old Dogwood road. Some cans of worms should never be opened for good reason. So there you are. That's my story. Well, what can I say? Isn't that the most incredible story? I loved every minute of it. What a fabulous story. And incredible things that happened on that old Dogwood road. I can't help wondering if that's a portal where all these strange, mysterious things happen. You know, a bit like a Bermuda Triangle on a road, so to speak. But anyway, what an incredible, incredible story. And let's just say, I do think that Gemma was being protected by that Bigfoot who she thought was pursuing her for evil means, when perhaps he was actually trying to protect her. Sometimes we can get the wrong impression about things. So until next time, goodbye and good night.